Hello, you're watching Sightline on MNB World. This year marks the 60th anniversary of the diplomatic relations between the United Kingdom and Mongolia. And on this occasion, we have invited British Ambassador to Mongolia, Mr. Phillip Malone. Phillip Malone was appointed British Ambassador to Mongolia in 2018. He joined the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in 1981. He has served in a range of FCO and overseas posts with a particular focus on Asia and Europe, including postings as Deputy Head of Mission in Helsinki, Head of Chancery in Singapore, and as a British Ambassador to Laos. The ambassador represents His Majesty the King and the UK government in the country to which they are appointed. They are responsible for the direction and work of the embassy and its consulates, including political work, trade and investment, press and cultural relations, and visa and consular services. Hello, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me here today. It's a real pleasure.
You're welcome, my pleasure. I would like to start our interview with the anniversary of diplomatic relations, and the United Kingdom was one of the first Western countries that have established diplomatic relations with Mongolia in 1963. And looking back at these 60 years, what kind of progress was made between the relations between our two countries?
Yeah, in fact, it was actually the UK was the very first Western country to establish relations, and that's something that we're very proud of, and it's something that even to this day is still recognised as an important milestone. But yes, 60 years is a long time. It's almost a whole lifetime. But I think this is especially auspicious because, of course, in the lunar calendar, 60 years is a very important milestone because of the 12-year and 5-year cycles. I think, and obviously the UK has changed a lot in those 60 years. Mongolia has as well, and the relationship has changed. But I think for me, really, if we look back to, say, between about the 1960s and the late 1980s, because during that period Mongolia was in the Soviet sphere of influence and the UK was in the Western bloc, if you like, we did establish some good relationships during that time, but they were perhaps a little bit limited because it was during the Cold War period. But in the 1990s, when things started to open up in Mongolia, the democratic changes and so on, I think the UK became much more engaged, supporting Mongolia's democratic transition. And then if we look over, say, the last maybe 10, 15 years, the relationship has really strengthened in a number of areas and become a much more, if you like, more modern relationship between two democratic partners. So it's been a very interesting sort of transition from those early days in the 1960s to where we are today.
And what are the main directions that the two countries are paying attention more in their relations?
Yeah, well, there are probably sort of 3 or 4 main sectors. Certainly, the economic relationship has strengthened a lot in the last 10, 15 years, and that's particularly because of investments into Mongolia. The largest, of course, is Rio Tinto, which is a UK-Australian company. Their investment in Oyu Tolgoi. There've been other UK investments as well into other sectors. And those investments have helped drive the trading between the two countries with UK exports to Mongolia and Mongolian imports to the UK. I would say the second area is how we work together on issues of international concern. Mongolia, I think, takes a very principled stance on international issues and democratic values and things like that. So we work together very closely with Mongolia on those areas. And then when it comes to economic development, the UK, we support where we can, either through international donors to which the UK makes large contributions, or perhaps more bilaterally. And we've done quite a lot of work around the climate change issue and the environment and things like that. And then, of course, education, which I think we'll talk about a bit later.
We just mentioned the economic and business cooperation. And as I saw the report for the 2022, in the second quarter of 2022, the total trade turnover was around like 213 million pounds, and of which 55 million pounds were like Mongolian export to UK. So there was a quite disbalance. And to your opinion, which Mongolian business sector attracts more UK market?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting because if you go back just a little bit further, maybe 2 or 3 years, in fact, the balance was in the other direction because Mongolia was exporting a lot of gold to the UK. That has changed a bit in the last couple of years, so we've seen a larger amount of exports from the UK. I mean, the sectors that certainly from the embassy perspective that we see the most interest are firstly related to the mining sector and infrastructure that's related to mining. So as well as the UK investments I mentioned, we see British companies such as Cummins, who make diesel engines, JCB, who make the big equipment, the excavators and so on, and Pandrol, which is a manufacturer of rail fasteners, and they've been doing a lot of business in the rail sector, which of course is linked to mining. And then aside from that, perhaps in areas like retail, the automotive sector, we have a Jaguar Land Rover dealership here who have been very successful, and particularly with the new models that have been coming out in recent years. And at the embassy, we've also, our trade team has been working a lot on the food and beverage sector. So we're seeing more UK food and beverage products coming into the Mongolian market. That's something we're working very hard on. And then beyond that, I think also education is a good area of interest because of the sort of growing interest in, particularly in English language teaching and having a kind of like a UK type education. And then I think one for the future could well be financial services. The UK has strong expertise in that area, and things are starting to change in the financial markets in Mongolia. So there could be lots of collaboration there as well.
Last year, trade envoy of the United Kingdom, Daniel Kawczynski, has paid a visit to Mongolia, and he had a delegation of British companies.
Yeah.
And to your opinion, like when British companies try to invest into a Mongolian business market, what kind of challenges do they face here in Mongolia?
Yeah. I mean, it's a very important question because while there are some very good opportunities here, no doubt about it, and there's great potential, I think, for countries like the UK to invest and do business here, there certainly are some challenges. And the sorts of things that we see from our business people are firstly around sort of bureaucracy and regulatory challenges. So although it's a relatively open market, if you're wanting to do business here, it can be quite a slow process bureaucratically. There are sometimes some regulatory barriers towards entering the market. So for example, we've been doing some work looking at the regulations around imports of alcohol into Mongolia, imports of pharmaceuticals, where there are some barriers to international business. So that's sort of one area. And then the second, I would say, where there have been some issues with investors, the dispute resolution system is not very robust, it's not very strong, and investors feel that it takes time to resolve disputes, sometimes a very long time. So I think that whole area of the sort of legal certainty is also a critical one for business as well. And I have to mention, of course, corruption is a problem in Mongolia, and we're seeing it right now with these issues around the coal contracts, and that also is something that makes business think a little bit about how to navigate those challenges in Mongolia as well.
I see. When we talk about the cooperation between two countries, it covers a lot of areas, several areas, and we cannot live without mentioning the education and culture cooperation.
Yeah.
And the important part of the UK-Mongolia cooperation is also a scholarship program, tuning scholarship program.
Yeah.
And until now, how many Mongolians have received the scholarship from UK government? And is there any plan to increase the number of recipients in the future?
Yeah, well, I mean, what's interesting this year, as well as being the 60th anniversary of diplomatic relations, it's actually the 30th anniversary of the start of the Chevening scheme in Mongolia. So over the last 30 years, we've seen over 200 Mongolian scholars who studied in the UK. When we first started 30 years ago, there were only 1 or 2 each year. The numbers were quite small, admittedly, but nowadays we're between 10 and 15 students each year are going to study, and it's a master's level program, hence the numbers are perhaps smaller than an undergraduate level program. But it's a really important program, and I meet the students before they go to the UK at the start of their studies and when they return, and they're a very impressive group of young people. I mean, extremely smart young people, and I think they get a lot of benefit from spending the time in the UK, both academically, but also from the broader sort of social, the social sort of things, education that they learn as well. I mean, I'm always hopeful that we can increase the numbers in years ahead, and we're certainly looking at ways of doing that. But we will definitely maintain the numbers as they are now, and I hope we can definitely increase them.
I see. And in what kind of studies are mostly interested Mongolian students when they go to the UK?
It's, to be honest, it's fairly varied. We don't specify particular sectors that we're focusing on. There's quite a lot around sort of around business, economics, finance, those sorts of areas. But this year, for example, we have a couple of scholars studying medicine, which we've not had so much in the past, and I think that's really important, because obviously that's a sector that definitely needs support in Mongolia. So we're very happy to see people from all sorts of different sectors, but particularly those that are supporting the development of Mongolia to develop different areas of public service, particularly.
Currently, international community is facing a lot of difficulties, beginning from the post-pandemic economic situation, and there's like regional issues like conflicts, armed conflicts, war in Ukraine, and we have seen some tendencies, like some countries moving from like democratic principles to more like authoritarian rules. And what do you think about this situation?
Yeah, I think it really is one of the most important questions of our time, what is happening with politics, geopolitics across the world, and the shock last year of Russia's terrible invasion of Ukraine has just really sort of had a big impact on democratic countries, or the democratic group of countries, because like Mongolia, all democratic countries, they believe in sort of freedom and the rule of law, and invading another country runs entirely contrary to that, and there's no reason for these things to happen. So I think it's important right now for countries with those democratic values to become even closer, work more closely together, and that's something we are seeing across the world between democratic countries in the West, in Asia, and Mongolia included, and other parts of the world. So. And it's also important for, I think, democratic countries to sort of stand up and be confident in democracy. It's not a perfect system, we know, but certainly the fact that it enables people to achieve their aspirations, and without being kind of told every day what they should or shouldn't do. But it is going to be a challenge for us, and at the same time we need to kind of challenge the authoritarian countries, where our interests don't align. We need to find ways to prevent the sort of spread of a more authoritarian kind of style of government, and find ways to collaborate more closely on the important issues of global concern, whether it's post-pandemic recovery or climate change or whatever it might be. But it is certainly a difficult period, I think, for the sort of democratic group of nations, definitely.
Talking about the cooperation between UK and Mongolia, we cannot live also without mentioning the cooperation in the defense and security sector. And what kind of progress are being made right now?
Yeah, well, indeed. I mean, I think this is also another area which shows how Mongolia plays a very constructive role on the international stage through the peacekeeping operations that Mongolia has been conducting for 20 years now, and we've collaborated with Mongolia to support them in those peacekeeping operations. We've worked together in places like Afghanistan and South Sudan, and I think there's been a lot of mutual learning from those experiences. I mean, to give you an example, in South Sudan, the Mongolian and British troops were sort of learning from each other. The British troops were learning a little bit about wrestling from their Mongolian friends, and they were helping the Mongolians learn some English.
That's great.
Which is nice. And we've also provided some support for English language learning for peacekeepers, because that is the language of peacekeepers. But aside from that, also the pandemic has slowed things down, of course, but in recent years we've been sending more senior Mongolian officers onto the senior training courses in the UK, and of course we've also participated in the conquest exercise most years, and we hope to do the same again this year. And as it is the 60th anniversary year of relations, we're working to renew the defence cooperation agreement between the UK and Mongolia, and I hope we can sign that during the year.
Well, returning back to our anniversary celebration discussion, what kind of activities are planned for the year 2023 from the Embassy of UK in Mongolia?
Yeah, well, we will have a launch reception for the year on the 23rd of January, which is the actual anniversary, and my colleague, the Mongolian ambassador in London, he will be doing exactly the same on that date, and they will have a large event as well in London. So we'll have in both London and Ulaanbaatar, we'll have launch events. We're looking at a number of visits in both directions, so British ministers coming here and hopefully Mongolian ministers going to the UK. A big piece of work we want to achieve this year is a broader, comprehensive partnership agreement between the UK and Mongolia. We have a number of bilateral agreements in lots of different areas, but we don't have one that's kind of overarching. So that's what we're hoping to achieve this year, alongside the Defence Cooperation Agreement that I mentioned. One particular area which has always interested me is air services, and we've been, for a number of years, we've been working on upgrading the air services agreement between the UK and Mongolia, and I think we're fairly close to finalising that for this year. So that will help to, in time, hopefully, to have maybe some code share agreements between UK and Mongolian carriers, and maybe, who knows, you know, in the future have some direct flights between London and Ulaanbaatar, which would be really, really nice. And then aside from that, during the year we'll have a number of events. We will probably have one of our, what we call our Inspire Me, sort of cultural education event, probably later in the year. And in London there will be a number of things that the embassy there is organising, including putting on performance of the Mongolian the Mongolian play, the Hunu, the Last Seal, which they're hoping to perform in London as well. So there'll be a number of things that we'll work on throughout the year.
Well, thank you for providing insights on UK and Mongolia relations.
Thank you, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Well, that was all for our new episode of Sightline. We'll see you next time with more stories and updates. Have a nice day.